My name is Carolyn, and I am 27 years old. When I was 12, my mother died after a short battle with cancer. My father remarried quickly and slowly, but surely I became an afterthought in his life. When I was 13 during summer vacation, my dad dropped me off at my Uncle Jack's farm. What was supposed to be a short visit turned into my new life. I never returned to my father's home. Years later, I discovered the real reason my uncle took me in. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. This story about betrayal, found family, and a secret that changed everything still brings tears to my eyes. My mother was my world. She had this warm smile that could light up any room, and her laugh was contagious. We were a small but happy family, just Mom, Dad, and me. We lived in a modest suburban home with a backyard where Mom grew her favorite roses. Every Sunday, we had pancake breakfast together, and every summer, we took a trip to the lake. Life seemed perfect. Then, just after my 12th birthday, Mom started getting these terrible headaches. At first, she dismissed them as stress, but when she began losing weight rapidly and having trouble remembering simple things, my dad finally convinced her to see a doctor. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt. Stage 4 brain cancer already spread too far. The doctors gave her 6 months. She barely made it 3. Those final months were a blur of hospital visits, the sharp smell of antiseptic, and watching my mother fade away before my eyes. She tried to stay strong for me, always managing a smile despite the pain. Near the end, she spent a lot of time talking quietly with my Uncle Jack, her only sibling. I would often find them whispering, only to stop when I entered the room. The day Mom died, my father collapsed in grief. He held her hand for hours after she was gone, refusing to leave her side. I had never seen him cry before, and his sobs echoed through the hospital hallways. Uncle Jack stayed with us for 2 weeks after the funeral, helping with meals and making sure I got to school. When he finally went back to his farm, Dad seemed to pull himself together a bit. For a while, it was just Dad and me swimming in our grief. We ate takeout most nights and barely spoke. The house felt so empty without Mom. 4 months after her funeral, Dad mentioned he had started attending a grief support group. He seemed a little brighter, a bit more functional. I was relieved, thinking maybe we were both starting to heal. Then he mentioned a woman named Sandra he had met at the group. Her husband had died of a heart attack the year before, leaving her with 2 children, Tyler, who was 15, and Megan, who was 11, just a year younger than me. Within weeks, Sandra was coming over for dinner. Soon after, her kids started joining her. 8 months after my mother died, my father announced he was marrying Sandra. Everything happened so quickly. One day, it was just the 2 of us in our grief, and suddenly, we were planning a wedding. I was still wearing the necklace Mom had given me on my last birthday when Dad and Sandra exchanged vows in our backyard, the same backyard where Mom's untended roses were withering. After the wedding, our house transformed. Sandra redecorated everything, packing away Mom's things into boxes that disappeared into the attic. My father, who had once cherished the family photos on our mantel, now displayed pictures of his new family. Our Sunday pancake tradition was replaced with Sandra's family brunch, where she served her special quiche that I secretly hated. Dad changed too. He started forgetting my school events, missing my soccer games, when he had never missed a single one while Mom was alive. When I made honor roll, he merely nodded, but when Megan brought home a B+, he took everyone out for ice cream to celebrate. It was like he was trying to erase his old life, including me, and throw himself completely into this new family. "Caroline, why can't you keep your room tidy like Megan?" became a common refrain. Or, "Caroline, Megan already finished her homework. What's taking you so long?" Every comparison stung like a paper cut. Small, but surprisingly painful. Sandra was always careful to play the caring stepmother when Dad was around. "David, Caroline needs new shoes for school," she would say thoughtfully. Or, "David, did you sign Caroline's permission slip?" But when he wasn't there, her tone changed. Your father works hard to support all of us now, she would say pointedly when I asked for anything. We all need to make sacrifices. Somehow those sacrifices always seem to fall on me. New house rules appeared that seemed designed to sideline me. Family movie night now featured films Tyler and Megan wanted to see. The bathroom schedule gave me the shortest morning slot, making me rush and often late for school. When I tried to talk to Dad about it, he was distracted. Sandra knows what she's doing, honey. She's managed 2 kids on her own. Try to cooperate more, he would say before turning back to his newspaper or heading out to help Tyler with something. I tried everything to reconnect with my father. I joined the photography club because he had always enjoyed taking pictures. I cooked his favorite meal for his birthday. I even tried to take an interest in golf, his newfound passion that he shared with Tyler. Nothing worked. It was like watching someone gradually forget you exist while you're standing right in front of them. The final blow came when Dad announced a big family vacation to Disney World for the upcoming summer. As he described the plans, I noticed he kept saying the 4 of us when talking about ride preferences and hotel arrangements. Dad, I interrupted during dinner. You mean the 5 of us, right? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sandra and my father exchanged a look. Actually, Caroline, my father said slowly, we were thinking this might be a good time for you to visit Uncle Jack. You always got along so well with him, and you haven't seen him since the funeral. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. I wasn't included in the family vacation. I wasn't included in the family at all. Just for part of the summer, my father assured me as he packed my suitcase into the trunk. Uncle Jack could use the company, and you always loved visiting the farm when you were little. I stood in our driveway, confused by the mixed emotions swirling inside me. On one hand, I was excited to see Uncle Jack. He was my mom's only brother, and his quiet, steady presence had always been comforting. On the other hand, the timing felt suspicious. Why exactly when the rest of the family was heading to Disney World? How long will I be staying? I asked, climbing into the passenger seat. We'll see, my father said vaguely. Maybe a few weeks. You'll have fun. The 3-hour drive to Uncle Jack's farm was awkward. Dad made forced conversation about school and my friends' topics he had shown little interest in for months. I mostly stared out the window, watching the suburbs give way to rural landscapes. When we stopped for lunch, I texted Megan asking if she was excited about Disney, still hoping there had been some misunderstanding. She replied with a row of exclamation points and, so excited Dad got us fast passes for everything. Dad? Not your dad or our dad. Just Dad. The distinction wasn't lost on me. When we finally pulled up to Uncle Jack's farmhouse, I noticed my uncle's surprised expression as he came out onto the porch. He was a tall man with the same warm brown eyes as my mother, though his were framed by deeper wrinkles and sun-weathered skin. He hugged me tightly before giving my father a questioning look. David, I thought you were coming next weekend, I heard him say as they stepped aside to talk privately on the porch. Their conversation was tense, with Uncle Jack's posture growing stiffer by the minute. I couldn't hear everything, but phrases like last-minute change and better for everyone drifted my way. When they finished talking, my father hugged me quickly, promised to be in touch soon about picking you up, and drove away with unsettling speed. Uncle Jack's farm was nothing like our suburban home. The 2-story farmhouse was over 100 years old, with creaking floorboards and drafty windows. My uncle lived alone since his divorce years ago, and the place had a distinct bachelor feel, functional but sparse, with mismatched furniture and minimal decoration. He showed me to the guest room, which he had clearly hastily prepared. The floral bedspread was faded but clean, and he had put a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. Not fancy, but I hope you'll be comfortable, he said awkwardly. Bathroom's down the hall. Kitchen's always open. Make yourself at home. Those first few days were strange. Uncle Jack was kind but clearly out of his element with a teenage girl in the house. He worked long hours tending to his crops and small herd of cattle while I spent time exploring the farm and helping with simple chores. Every night, I checked my phone expecting Dad to call with pickup plans. Every night, I was disappointed. After a week, I finally received a text from my father. "Having a great time at Disney. Hope Farm is fun. We'll call about coming home soon." Attached was a photo of him, Sandra, Tyler, and Megan posing with Mickey Mouse, all sunburned and smiling. I fought back tears as I scrolled through more vacation photos they had posted on social media. "Your dad call yet?" Uncle Jack asked casually over breakfast the next morning. "Just a text," I mumbled, pushing my eggs around the plate. "They're having a great time at Disney." Uncle Jack's face darkened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Well, plenty to do around here, too. Thought maybe you could help me at the farmer's market tomorrow if you want. People always buy more when a pretty young lady is working the stand." I agreed half-heartedly, still convinced my stay was temporary. But as days turned into weeks, my father's communication became increasingly sporadic and vague. "Work is crazy right now," he would text. Or, "Sandra's mother is visiting next weekend, not a good time." Always with a promise to figure something out soon. Meanwhile, I kept seeing their family photos online. Trips to the water park, backyard barbecues, shopping excursions. My absence was conspicuous, yet no one seemed to notice. One night, about 3 weeks into my stay, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard Uncle Jack on the phone in his study, his voice uncharacteristically raised. "David, this isn't what we discussed," he was saying tersely. "You said a couple of weeks, not the entire summer. No, that's not fair to her. She keeps asking when you're coming. You can't just—" There was a long pause. "Fine, but you need to be straight with her. I'm not going to lie to her for you." The next morning, I confronted Uncle Jack as he was heading out to the fields. "When is Dad coming to get me?" I asked directly. Uncle Jack stopped, his weathered face pained. He set down his work gloves and gestured for me to sit with him on the porch steps. "Caroline, your father called last night," he said slowly. "He asked if you could stay here a bit longer." "How much longer?" I demanded, my heart pounding. Uncle Jack looked away, focusing on the distant cornfields. "He wasn't specific, but I think we should prepare for you to stay through the summer at least." In that moment, on a sagging porch step next to my reluctant uncle, I began to understand that this wasn't just a summer visit. This was the beginning of my father giving me away. The school enrollment papers arrived in early August. I was sitting on the porch swing reading when the mail truck came up the dusty driveway. Uncle Jack collected the mail, sorting through it as he walked back to the house. His step faltered when he saw the large envelope from Jefferson County School District. "What is it?" I asked, noticing his expression. "School registration forms," he said quietly. "Your father must have had your records transferred." I grabbed the envelope from his hands. Sure enough, inside were enrollment forms for Jefferson County High School transfer paperwork and a copy of my vaccination records. My father had listed Uncle Jack's address as my permanent residence. The reality I had been avoiding for weeks crashed down around me. This wasn't temporary. My father wasn't coming back for me. He had moved on with his new family, and I was no longer part of the picture. I locked myself in the guest room, what was apparently now my room, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. Hours later, there was a hesitant knock at my door. "Caroline," Uncle Jack called softly. "I made some dinner if you want any. It's just spaghetti, nothing fancy." When I didn't respond, he added, "Listen, I called your father. He's going to call you tomorrow to explain things. For what it's worth, I'm real sorry about all this." The next day, my father finally called. His voice was overly cheerful, as if we were discussing something trivial, like the weather, instead of my entire life. "It just makes more sense for now, honey," he explained. Tyler's been having some adjustment issues, and Megan needs more attention with starting middle school. And well, Sandra and I have some news. We're expecting a baby in December. A baby. They were having a baby. The final piece of their perfect new family. So, with the baby coming, we're converting the third bedroom into a nursery, he continued. Space is tight, and Uncle Jack has all that room at the farm. Fresh air, wide open spaces. It's really better for a teenager. Much better than our crowded subdivision. Every word was like a knife twisting deeper. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. There was no place for me in his new life. I was an inconvenient reminder of his past. We'll still see each other, he promised hollowly. Maybe you can come for weekends sometimes, and holidays, of course. But the promised weekend visits never materialized. There was always an excuse. Sandra not feeling well with the pregnancy, Tyler's football games, bad weather, making the drive dangerous. The first promised visit was rescheduled 3 times before being canceled altogether. Meanwhile, social media showed their perfect family life continuing without me. Photos of nursery preparations, gender reveal parties, family game nights. When I commented on one picture, "Miss you guys," the comment lingered unacknowledged for days before disappearing completely. Shortly after, I discovered I no longer had access to my father's accounts. I had been digitally erased just as I had been physically removed. My performance at my new school suffered as I struggled with depression and adjustment. The rural school was smaller than my previous one, with everyone knowing each other since kindergarten. I was the obvious outsider, the city girl living with her uncle for reasons no one quite understood. Uncle Jack, for his part, was trying. I would catch him reading parenting books when he thought I wasn't looking. He attended my first parent-teacher conference wearing an ironed shirt that still had creases from the package. When my English teacher mentioned I seemed withdrawn, Uncle Jack nodded solemnly and asked what he could do to help. He was awkward but sincere, clearly out of his depth, but unwilling to show it. As Thanksgiving approached, my father called to tell me that they would be spending the holiday with Sandra's family in Chicago. But we'll definitely have you for Christmas, he promised. Sandra's already planning a big family celebration. I didn't believe him, but I clung to the hope anyway. Uncle Jack and I had a quiet Thanksgiving with TV dinners and a football game on television. He apologized repeatedly for the lack of traditional food. Never was much of a cook, he admitted. Your mom was always the one who handled the holidays. It's okay, I told him, surprised to realize I meant it. The simple meal with my uncle was better than the elaborate feast with people who didn't want me there would have been. A week before Christmas, my father called again. Sandra's pregnancy was having complications. They needed to stay close to her doctor. Christmas would have to wait until next year. I wasn't surprised, but the final rejection still hurt. That night, I heard Uncle Jack on the phone again, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. This is the 3rd time you've canceled on her, David. No, I don't think you understand what this is doing to her. She's your daughter, for God's sake. Fine, we'll make it legal then, if that's what you want. The next day, Uncle Jack awkwardly explained that my father thought it would be more stable if Uncle Jack became my legal guardian. The paperwork arrived by certified mail 2 days later, already signed by my father. He had given me away as easily as donating old clothes to charity. That Christmas Eve, I sat on my bed, looking at the last photo taken of my mother, father, and me together. We were at the lake, all smiling, my father's arm around my mother's waist. I barely recognized the man in the photo. The father who had once loved me enough to carry me on his shoulders through crowded parks had discarded me without a backward glance. Uncle Jack knocked softly before entering with a small, clumsily wrapped package. Not much good at wrapping, he said, sitting awkwardly on the edge of my bed. Your mom always did that too. I unwrapped it to find a silver frame holding a photo of my mother as a teenager sitting on the same porch swing. I now used her smile, bright and carefree. Thought you might like to have it, Uncle Jack said softly. I traced my mother's face with my finger tears spilling down my cheeks. Uncle Jack hesitantly put his arm around my shoulders, patting me awkwardly. Listen, Caroline, he said after a moment. I know I'm not who you want to be with. I know this isn't how things were supposed to go. I'm not much good at all this guardian stuff. But you have a home here as long as you want it. That's a promise. In that moment, his simple, heartfelt words meant more than all my father's hollow promises combined. Time has a way of healing even the deepest wounds, or at least helping you learn to live with the scars. As weeks turned into months, life at Uncle Jack's farm gradually became my new normal. The guest room transformed into my space, with posters on the walls and books stacked on the nightstand. Uncle Jack built me a desk by the window where I could do homework while watching the sunset over the cornfields. What surprised me most was how Uncle Jack changed. This quiet, reserved man who had always lived alone was making sincere efforts to create a stable home. I caught him watching cooking shows and taking notes. Suddenly, our meals improved beyond his standard rotation of spaghetti burgers and grilled cheese. He attempted chicken stir-fry homemade soups and once a disastrous but well-intentioned attempt at lasagna that we both agreed never to mention again. Your mother was a great cook, he would say, stirring something experimental on the stove. She tried to teach me once, but I was a lost cause. Guess I should have paid more attention. These casual mentions of Mom became a lifeline for me. Unlike my father, who had purged all traces of her from his life, Uncle Jack willingly shared stories and memories. I learned that my mother had been a rebellious teenager who once drove their father's tractor into a pond. I discovered she had wanted to be a veterinarian before meeting my father and changing her career path. Each story was like finding a missing puzzle piece of the woman I had lost too soon. School remained challenging, but things improved when I met Allison in my biology class. She lived on a neighboring farm and offered me a seat at her lunch table after noticing me eating alone. Allison was refreshingly straightforward, with no patience for drama or pretense. People will stop seeing you as the new girl eventually, she assured me. Took me 3 years, and my family has only been here for 5 generations instead of 10. Her dry humor and loyalty quickly made her my closest friend. Uncle Jack began teaching me about the farm work, starting with simple tasks like collecting eggs from the small chicken coop and gradually introducing me to more complex responsibilities. There was something soothing about the rhythmic nature of farm life, the predictable patterns of planting and harvesting, the reliable needs of animals, the direct relationship between work and results. Unlike the complicated emotional landscape of family relationships, the farm operated on clear, understandable principles. Our communication developed its own rhythm, too. Uncle Jack wasn't a man of many words, but I learned to interpret his grunts, nods, and the various tones of his In return, he became attuned to my moods, knowing when to give me space and when to offer quiet company. We developed inside jokes and references that might seem insignificant to outsiders, but formed the foundation of our growing bond. Our first Thanksgiving had been makeshift, but by the time Easter arrived, Uncle Jack had consulted with Allison's mother for recipes and advice. He proudly served a proper ham dinner, with all the trimmings beaming when I took seconds of his sweet potato casserole. We established new traditions: Sunday drives in his old pickup truck, monthly trips to the bookstore in the neighboring town, movie nights where we alternated choices. My father's sporadic contact became even less frequent. The promised weekend visits never materialized, and his calls dwindled to perfunctory birthday and holiday greetings. When he did reach out, Uncle Jack became protective, screening calls and messages before passing them on to me. You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to, he assured me after one particularly disappointing Christmas call, where my father spent most of the time talking about the baby's first Christmas. He doesn't really want to talk to me anyway, I said, trying to sound matter-of-fact rather than hurt. He's just checking a box on his good father list. Uncle Jack's face darkened. Then he doesn't deserve your time, he said firmly, in a rare display of direct criticism toward my father. During my sophomore year of high school, I discovered an old camera in a box of my mother's things that Uncle Jack had stored in the attic. It was her Nikon film camera from college, still in working condition. Uncle Jack not only found new batteries for it, but also drove me 40 miles to the nearest camera shop to buy film and learn how to use it properly. Photography became my passion and connection to my mother. I learned she had been the photographer for her college newspaper, and some of her work had even been published in local magazines. Uncle Jack encouraged this link to her paying for photography classes at the community college during summer breaks, and converting a small storage room into a dark room where I could develop my black and white film. When I received an honorable mention in a regional photography contest, Uncle Jack framed the certificate and hung it prominently in the living room. He attended every school art show and exhibition standing awkwardly in his good flannel shirt, making polite conversation with teachers and parents while radiating unmistakable pride. By the time high school graduation approached, the farm truly felt like home, and Uncle Jack had become much more than a reluctant guardian. He had never tried to replace my father or pretend our situation was normal, but his steady, reliable presence had given me security when I needed it most. My father sent a generic card with a check for graduation, but didn't attend the ceremony. Uncle Jack sat in the front row, filming the entire thing on a camcorder he had purchased specifically for the occasion. When my name was called, I heard his distinctive whistle above the polite applause. At the small celebration dinner he organized afterward, I caught him wiping away tears when he thought no one was looking. As I began applying to colleges, Uncle Jack was unfailingly supportive, though I could see the worry in his eyes about the potential costs. One evening, while searching for stamps in his desk drawer to mail an application, I accidentally found financial paperwork that revealed the truth about our situation. Uncle Jack had taken out a second mortgage on the farm 3 years earlier, right around the time he had become my guardian. He had been putting money aside for my education all along, making quiet sacrifices I had never known about. When I confronted him about it, he shrugged it off in his typical understated manner. "Your mother would have wanted you to have opportunities," was all he said before changing the subject. It was around this time that I began to seriously question why Uncle Jack had taken me in. Yes, he was my only close relative besides my father, but that didn't explain his willingness to completely rearrange his life for a teenage girl he had only seen occasionally before my mother's death. There was a deeper story here, and as I prepared to leave for college, I became determined to uncover it. I came home from my first semester at college for winter break, excited to sleep in my own bed and enjoy Uncle Jack's now quite decent cooking. The farm looked magical with the light dusting of snow, and Uncle Jack had even put up Christmas lights along the porch railing, something he had never done before I came to live with him. After a welcome home dinner of my favorite pot roast, I decided to look through some old family photos for a multimedia project in my photography class. Uncle Jack directed me to some boxes in the attic that contained albums and loose photos from when my mother was young. "There should be some good ones of your mom and me as kids," he said. "Your grandparents were good about documenting everything." The attic was cold but well organized with labeled boxes stacked neatly against the sloped walls. I found the photo boxes easily enough, but while searching through them, I noticed another box marked simply Lisa, my mother's name. Curious, I opened it to find a collection of items that clearly meant something to Uncle Jack. A faded concert ticket stub birthday cards, and beneath them, a bundle of letters tied with a simple blue ribbon. I knew I shouldn't read them, but my curiosity about my mother, and about Uncle Jack's decision to take me in, overrode my better judgment. The letters were exchanges between my mother and Uncle Jack during her illness, and they revealed a story I had never known. "Jack, I need to ask something important," one letter began. "David is a good man in many ways, but he's never been strong during difficult times. I'm worried about Caroline after I'm gone. I've seen how he avoids hard conversations and painful situations. Promise me you'll keep an eye on them. If Caroline ever needs you, really needs you, promise you'll be there for her." Another letter dated just weeks before her death was more direct. "The doctors say it's time to get things in order. I've spoken with David about my concerns, but he's still in denial about everything. I'm making you the backup guardian in my will. I pray it will never be necessary, but if something happens and Caroline needs a home, promise me you'll step in. She's the most precious thing in my life, and knowing you'll be there for her brings me peace." There were more letters along with legal documents showing my mother had indeed named Uncle Jack as an alternative guardian. But most surprising were the diary entries, pages from my mother's journal that she must have given to Uncle Jack for safekeeping. "David brought home the woman from his support group again," one entry read. "I shouldn't feel jealous. I'll be gone soon and he deserves happiness. But something about how quickly he's moving on scares me. It's like he's trying to replace this life rather than heal from losing it. I worry about what that means for Caroline." Reading these private thoughts written when my mother knew she was dying was overwhelming. She had foreseen everything: my father's remarriage, his tendency to avoid painful emotions, even the possibility that I might eventually need a different home. And she had prepared for it by extracting a promise from her brother, a man who had lived alone his entire adult life and had no experience raising children. Tears streamed down my face as the pieces fell into place. Uncle Jack hadn't taken me in on a sudden whim or out of mere family obligation. He had been fulfilling a solemn promise made to his dying sister. A promise he had kept even when it meant completely restructuring his life and taking on a responsibility he was completely unprepared for. I stormed downstairs, letters in hand, to find Uncle Jack dozing in his recliner with the TV on low volume. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, startling him awake. He looked confused until he saw what I was holding. Then his expression shifted to resignation. "Caroline, those are private." "She knew," I interrupted. "Mom knew Dad would do this. She knew he'd replace her, replace us, and move on like we never existed. And you knew too. You knew, and you never told me." Uncle Jack sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. "Sit down, please," he said quietly. I sat on the edge of the couch, still clutching the letters. "Your mother was worried," he admitted. "Not certain, just worried. She saw patterns in your father that concerned her, but she also loved him and believed in him. She hoped he would rise to the occasion." "Then why make you promise to take me?" "Because she was practical. She always prepared for all possibilities." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "When your father first dropped you off, I thought it was just for a visit. I didn't realize what was happening until weeks later. I kept hoping he would come to his senses. But why keep the promise a secret from me? Why let me think you were just taking me in because there was nowhere else for me to go?" Uncle Jack's eyes reflected genuine pain. "I didn't want you to lose both parents at once. I hoped your father would step up, that his abandonment would be temporary. Telling you about your mother's concerns would have meant admitting he had failed both of you completely." His words hit me hard. Uncle Jack had been protecting me from the full truth, that my mother had predicted my father's abandonment and that my father had proven her right in the worst possible way. "It wasn't my place to destroy your relationship with your father," he continued softly. "And it wasn't just about the promise. Yes, I took you in because I promised Lisa, but I kept you because you're my niece, and I grew to love having you here. This was never a burden, Caroline. It became the most meaningful thing in my life." I was touched by his words, but still angry about the secrets. Without responding, I gathered my things and left, driving to Allison's house, where I stayed for several days trying to process this new information. I had always thought my father's abandonment was a reaction to new circumstances: his marriage, the stepchildren, the baby. Now I realized it had been a fundamental character flaw that my mother had recognized even before she died. After a week of avoiding Uncle Jack, I made a decision. It was time to confront my father directly, face to face, after years of minimal contact. I drove to his house unannounced, my heart pounding as I parked in front of the suburban home that had once been mine. Sandra answered the door, clearly shocked to see me. She had aged since I had last seen her, with stress lines around her eyes and mouth. Behind her, I could see unfamiliar toys scattered across the living room floor. "Caroline," she said, her voice artificially pleasant. "This is unexpected." "I need to talk to my father," I said firmly. She hesitated before reluctantly inviting me in. The house had been completely transformed, with no trace of the home I had once known. My father came in from the backyard, followed by two children I barely recognized as Tyler and Megan, now older teenagers, and a toddler who must have been their half-brother. My father looked older and heavier, his hair now more gray than brown. He froze when he saw me, an expression of guilt flashing across his face before he composed himself. "Caroline," he said, as if I were a casual acquaintance he had run into at the grocery store. "This is a surprise. You should have called first." "Would you have answered?" I asked bluntly. The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. "We need to talk," I said. "Alone." We ended up sitting in his car in the driveway, the only place where we could have privacy. I confronted him directly about his abandonment, about the broken promises, about the way he had erased me from his life. "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "It was a difficult time. Sandra needed my support with the kids, and then the baby came, and I was inconvenient. I finished for him. A reminder of your past life that didn't fit with the new image you wanted." "That's not fair," he argued, but I could see in his eyes that I had hit the mark. "Mom knew," I said quietly. "She knew you'd do this. That's why she made Uncle Jack promise to take me in if I ever needed a home." He flinched as if I had slapped him. "Your mother was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly." "She was thinking perfectly clearly," I interrupted. "She saw you clearly, even if I couldn't." We talked for over an hour, though talked might be generous. I spoke my truth, while my father offered weak justifications and rewrote history to cast himself as a concerned parent who had only wanted what was best for me. According to his version, the farm had offered opportunities my stepfamily couldn't, and Uncle Jack had needed the company. He had convinced himself he had done me a favor. As I listened to his hollow explanations, I realized something important. This man was exactly who my mother had feared he would become in her absence. He had chosen the path of least resistance, avoiding pain, by replacing rather than healing, discarding rather than working through difficulties. In that moment, I felt an odd sense of closure. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. I left without any of the dramatic reconciliation or breakdown that might happen in movies. There were no tears or shouting, just a quiet recognition that some bridges cannot be rebuilt once they've been burned. I drove back to Uncle Jack's farm, my home, with a heavier heart but a clearer mind. I spent 2 days at Allison's house, sorting through my complicated feelings about my mother's predictions, my father's failures, and Uncle Jack's role in it all. Allison listened without judgment, offering practical perspective when needed. "So, your uncle didn't tell you about this promise because he wanted to protect your relationship with your dad," she summarized after I explained everything. "I guess," I admitted, "but he kept me in the dark for years." "Sounds like he was trying to do right by everyone," Allison said thoughtfully. "Your mom by keeping his promise, your dad by not trash-talking him, and you by giving you a home without making you feel like a charity case." Her words made me pause. I had been so focused on the secrecy that I hadn't fully considered Uncle Jack's impossible position. He had been handed a responsibility he never asked for, with no preparation and no clear guidelines beyond a promise to a dying sister. Curious to learn more, I returned to the farm, while Uncle Jack was out, knowing I needed more time with those letters and documents. In the attic, I found additional correspondence I had missed before. Letters from Uncle Jack to my father over the years I had lived on the farm. These weren't angry accusations or guilt trips as I might have expected. Instead, they were regular updates about my life, my adjustment to the new school, my developing interest in photography, my friendship with Allison. Uncle Jack had been keeping my father informed about my life all along, maintaining a connection my father had been too weak to maintain himself. I also found invitations, dozens of them, that Uncle Jack had sent to my father over the years. Invitations to school events, my photography exhibitions, even casual barbecues at the farm. Most had gone unanswered based on the lack of response letters. Uncle Jack had been consistently trying to rebuild the bridge my father had burned. The financial records I examined next told another story. Uncle Jack had not only taken out that second mortgage, but had also turned down a lucrative job offer from a large agricultural company that would have required relocation. He had chosen stability for me over career advancement for himself. As I was carefully returning these documents to their boxes, I noticed several books on a nearby shelf that seemed out of place among Uncle Jack's usual farming manuals and history books: Parenting Teenagers, a Survival Guide, The Single Father's Handbook, and Raising Strong Women. Each was dog-eared and highlighted with notes in Uncle Jack's distinctive handwriting filling the margins. I was still processing these discoveries when I ran into Bill, Uncle Jack's oldest friend, at the general store in town. After some small talk, I worked up the courage to ask him about Uncle Jack's decision to take me in. Bill's weathered face softened. "That wasn't an easy time for Jack," he admitted. "He was still grieving your mother something fierce. They were always close, those two." "Did he ever consider not taking me?" I asked directly. Bill looked surprised. "Not that I ever heard. Was worried sick about doing it right, though. Man had never so much as owned a houseplant, and suddenly he's raising a teenage girl." Bill chuckled. "He turned down that job in Nebraska, you know. Would have doubled his income." "He did?" "Yep. Said you'd been through enough changes already. Couldn't uproot you again." Bill shook his head admiringly. "That's Jack, though. Once he commits to something, he's all in. Been that way since we were kids." As Bill talked, I began to see Uncle Jack's sacrifice more clearly. He had put aside his own grief, his career plans, even potential relationships to provide me with stability. And he had done it all without complaint or expectation of gratitude. When I returned to the farm that evening, I found Uncle Jack sitting on the porch swing, staring out at the fields as the sun set. For the first time, I really looked at him. The gray in his hair that hadn't been there when I arrived 5 years ago, the deeper lines around his eyes, the weathered hands that had worked so hard to provide for us both. He looked up as I approached, relief washing over his face. "Caroline," he said simply, "you're back." I sat beside him on the swing, noting how he had maintained it in perfect working order all these years, just as he had maintained my room exactly as I had left it for college, neither changing a thing nor letting it fall into disrepair in my absence. "I read more of the letters," I admitted, "and talked to Bill." Uncle Jack nodded, not surprised or upset that I had been investigating. "I know I should have told you about your mother's concerns," he said quietly. "Maybe that was wrong, but everything happened so fast when your father brought you here. One minute, I was a bachelor farmer with no responsibilities beyond my crops and cattle, and the next, I was responsible for a heartbroken teenage girl." He looked at me directly. "I was terrified of failing you both." "Both? You and Lisa?" he clarified. "Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew. She faced death with more courage than most people show in their entire lives. Her last thoughts were about making sure you would be okay." His voice broke slightly. "How could I possibly live up to that? I didn't know the first thing about raising a child, let alone a girl who had just lost her mother and been abandoned by her father." I had never considered how daunting the situation must have been from his perspective. Uncle Jack had been dealing with his own grief over losing his sister while suddenly becoming responsible for her traumatized daughter. "I kept thinking I was temporary," he continued. that your father would come to his senses and step up. When he didn't, well, I just did the best I could day by day. There was no grand plan, Caroline. Just a promise and a lot of trial and error. You never made me feel unwanted, I said softly. Not once. He smiled slightly. That was the easy part. You were Lisa's daughter. How could you ever be unwanted? But your whole life changed because of me. For the better, he said firmly. Before you came, I was just existing, working the farm, watching TV, sleeping, repeating the cycle. You gave me purpose, a reason to try harder to be better. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. Your mother wrote this to me the week before she died. I've carried it ever since. Maybe it's time you read it. The letter was written in my mother's handwriting, now shakier than I remembered. It was short, but powerful. Jack, my dear brother, if you're reading this letter years from now, it means you kept your promise, and Caroline needed you. I'm sorry to have placed this burden on your shoulders, but there is no one else I trust more with my most precious gift. You may doubt yourself. You always did underestimate your own strength, but I never have. You will love her as your own. I know this with absolute certainty because that's who you are. Tell her stories about me when she's ready to hear them. Tell her I loved her more than my own heartbeat. And know that my love for you both continues even beyond this life. With eternal gratitude, Lisa. Tears blurred my vision as I carefully refolded the letter. The three of us were connected by a thread of love and sacrifice that extended beyond death. My mother's foresight and final act of protection, Uncle Jack's faithful promise and steadfast care, and my own journey from abandonment to finding a different kind of family. She was right about you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Uncle Jack put his arm around my shoulders, more comfortable with the gesture now than he had been years ago. She was right about a lot of things, he said simply. In that moment, on a porch swing, watching the sun set over fields that had become my home, I finally understood the depth of what had happened. Uncle Jack hadn't just provided me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. He had chosen me day after day, year after year. He had built a life around ensuring mine could continue to grow and thrive. In the process, what began as reluctant guardianship had transformed into the purest form of family, one built on choice rather than obligation. 3 years later, I stood in my cap and gown on the university quadrangle, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. The spring sunshine was warm on my shoulders as I spotted Uncle Jack standing near the back, his height making him easy to find. He was wearing a proper suit for the occasion, probably the same one he had worn to my mother's funeral, now slightly tight across the shoulders, and looking uncharacteristically nervous among the crowd of parents and relatives. When my name was called, I heard his distinctive whistle above the applause. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, I glanced toward the sound and saw him standing clapping with unrestrained pride. Beside him, to my surprise, stood my father with his family. Sandra, the teenagers, Tyler and Megan, and their young brother, who must have been about 5 now. After the ceremony, Uncle Jack enveloped me in a bear hug. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. My father approached cautiously, offering awkward congratulations. Our relationship had thawed slightly over the past few years, though. It would never be what it once was. After my confrontation with him, he had made somewhat more consistent efforts to maintain contact. Birthday cards that actually arrived on time, occasional phone calls on holidays. It wasn't much, but it was an acknowledgement of my existence that had been absent for years. The graduation dinner that evening was Uncle Jack's treat at the nicest restaurant in town. He had reserved a private room and invited several of my friends from college. As I looked around the table at the people gathered to celebrate my achievement, I realized how much my life had changed from the day I was dropped off at the farm. "I have an announcement," I said when dessert was served. "I've been offered a job with the regional magazine. It's a photography position documenting rural life and agriculture across the state." Uncle Jack raised his glass in a toast. "Congratulations. When do you start? Will you be moving to the city?" "That's the best part," I said, smiling. "The job is based locally and I can work from home most of the time. So I was thinking, if it's okay with you, I'd like to move back to the farm." The surprise on Uncle Jack's face was quickly replaced by poorly concealed joy. "You want to move back? But surely a young woman like you wants her own place, not to be stuck out in the sticks with an old farmer." "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about building that small guest house by the pond that you mentioned years ago. I could have my own space, but still be home." I emphasized the last word, watching his expression soften. "That pond has the best light in the morning," he agreed, already considering the practical aspects. "We'd need to run electricity out there, but the foundation could be poured before fall if we start planning now." Later that week, after returning to the farm, I outlined my ideas for modernizing parts of the business. With my photography skills and marketing knowledge, we could create a farm website, offer tours during harvest season, maybe even host photography workshops using the picturesque setting. "This place has supported 3 generations of our family," I explained as we walked the property. "With some updates, it can support the next generation too." Uncle Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother always said this land had more potential than I was using. Guess she was right about that too." Over the next year, our plans took shape. The small house by the pond was completed just before winter, giving me independence while keeping me connected to the farm. My photography business grew alongside Uncle Jack's revitalized farm operation. When my work was featured in a major exhibition in the city, Uncle Jack rented a van and brought half the town to the opening night. The following spring, my father reached out with a more substantial attempt at reconciliation. His youngest son was starting school. Sandra had returned to work, and he seemed to be reflecting on his life choices with a new perspective. While I maintained boundaries, I allowed for the possibility of a healthier, if limited, relationship. "He's trying," Uncle Jack observed after my father had visited the farm for the first time in years. "Not saying he deserves forgiveness, but people can change." "Some people," I agreed. "Others just stay steady all along." I squeezed his hand, knowing he understood my meaning. That summer, Uncle Jack had a health scare. Chest pains that turned out to be angina rather than a full heart attack. The roles reversed as I drove him to doctor's appointments and managed the farm operations during his recovery. As I stepped into the caretaker role, I realized how completely our lives had intertwined. The reluctant guardian and abandoned niece had become a family in the truest sense. With proper medication and some lifestyle changes, Uncle Jack recovered fully. The farm continued to thrive with our combined efforts. We expanded into organic crops, added a small lavender field that became popular with visitors, and converted one of the old barns into a photography studio where I could work during the winter months. On a crisp fall day, 7 years after I had first arrived at the farm, I was sorting through old boxes in preparation for renovating part of the farmhouse when I found one final letter from my mother that I had never seen before. It was addressed to Uncle Jack, but marked, "To be given to Caroline when the time is right." With trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Caroline, if you're reading this, it means 2 things. I am gone, and your Uncle Jack has become the person I always knew he could be. I asked him to keep this letter until he felt you were ready to understand the full story. I knew your father's weaknesses long before my illness. I loved him, and I believe he loved me, but I saw how he avoided difficult truths and painful situations. I worried what would happen to you if I was no longer there to be the stable center of our family. So I asked the strongest person I knew, my brother, to make me a promise. Not just to take you in if needed, but to love you as his own. Jack has never had children of his own, but I knew with absolute certainty that he would love you completely if given the chance. The quiet strength that some might mistake for distance is actually the deepest kind of loyalty. If he has kept his promise, you have discovered this for yourself by now. Sometimes, the family we build through choice and commitment is stronger than the one we're born into. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to watch you grow up. Know that I loved you more than anything in this world, and that by entrusting you to Jack, I gave you the next best thing to having me there. Someone who would love you just as fiercely, just as completely. All my love, forever, Mom. I found Uncle Jack on the porch watching the sunset, as he often did. Wordlessly, I handed him the letter before sitting beside him on the swing. We read it together, his weathered hand finding mine as tears tracked down both our faces. She was right, I said finally. About everything. Uncle Jack nodded beyond words for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. When your father first brought you here, I was terrified. I had no idea how to raise a teenage girl. I just knew I had to try because I'd promised Lisa. And now, I prompted gently. He looked at me, his eyes clear and certain. Now I know it was the best promise I ever made. You coming here saved me as much as I might have helped you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I thought about the strange path my life had taken. My father's abandonment, which had once seemed like the end of my world, had actually been the beginning of something precious and real. Uncle Jack's reluctant guardianship had transformed into a bond that defined us both. Sometimes I realized what looks like rejection is actually redirection. What feels like an ending can be the start of something better than we ever imagined. And family, true family, isn't always defined by blood, but by who stays when everyone else walks away. What unexpected journey has life taken you on? Have you ever found family in places you never expected? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more stories, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest heartbreaks. Thank you for listening, and remember that family is about love, not blood.